A gut check on the pandemic now that we're 5 months in. What's the least effective kind of mask to wear? And college football, is it on or is it off? Here's what you need to know. Good Monday morning. This is Cheddar's Need to Know podcast for August 10th. I am, as you can hear, Carlo Versano. She has the day off today, so it'll just be me. Okay, let's get to the news, as Jill would say. The United States hitting 5 million confirmed coronavirus cases over the weekend, far and away the most of any country in the world. Our new cases are running at about 54,000 a day, which is obviously extremely high. It is a little bit down. We were running at about 70,000 a day in the peak of July. According to a new study from the National Association of Pediatricians, almost 100,000 children nationwide have tested positive just in the last 2 weeks of July. So that gives you sort of a sense that it's not that kids aren't getting this virus, right? It happens to be that they are getting it, but they can be asymptomatic. They don't get it. They don't get it as bad as adults. But of course, that's a lot. That's a very high positive caseload just before school starts. So it just adds to the debate there. And I do want to mention that I just saw, we talked the other day last week about that school in Georgia where the girl was suspended for taking photos of the students in the hallway without masks. Well, sure enough, that school is now going into a temporary sort of like hold, if you will, because they have half a dozen confirmed cases of the coronavirus between students and faculty. So I just wanted to give a little update on that. But there is a little bit of good news. Cases are starting to fall in some areas that were major hotspots, notably Arizona. It's still very risky there, but it is notably less risky than it was even a few weeks ago. So kudos to Arizonians for at least looking like they're on the right path. Meanwhile, cases are rising in states like Hawaii. There's a fairly significant outbreak out there near Honolulu now. Atlanta's not looking great. But again, the national death toll stands at about 163,000. So I just wanted to do a little bit of gut check on where we stand as a country. On August 10th, it was about March 10th that this whole thing sort of went sideways. So this is where we are. Meanwhile, President Trump doing an end run around Congress this weekend, signing a series of executive orders that he said would provide immediate economic relief, such as extending enhanced unemployment benefits and deferring the payroll tax for businesses. So it's a little bit complicated, and there's a lot of politics involved. But the fact of the matter is, the executive orders are not going to have much immediate impact, at least when it comes to getting cash into the hands of people out of work, which I think most people agree is sort of the thing that's keeping us now from kind of a consumer-led really deep recession, as opposed to just the recession created by the business closures. So the cornerstone of the president's plan is he's going to use FEMA funds, right? So disaster relief funds, to come up with a $300 weekly unemployment stipend, and then states would kick in another $100 if they can afford it. So it would be a $400 stipend as opposed to $600. Now, the state being able to afford it, that's a big if, right? Most states are broke right now. We're staring down the barrel of a major fiscal crisis in a lot of cities and states in this country. Not to mention the fact that putting an extra burden on state unemployment offices right now, I think, is probably ill-advised. It's already, it takes weeks in some states for people to be able to collect their unemployment benefits, just because these offices are, understaffed and completely overloaded. But all that is to say that it may not even matter, because this is almost certainly going to be challenged in court. It's going to have very little impact immediately. As I said before, Democrats are calling it a constitutional overreach. Though the politics, like I said, are a little bit tricky, because Democrats aren't going to be doing themselves any favors by challenging it, right? Because then that's going to allow the president and the White House to say, like, oh, look, the Democrats are out there trying to keep this money out of people's hands. So it's a little bit of a tricky scenario. But the other part of this, the other big thing that the president has been sort of like obsessed with, is a payroll tax cut, which he is sort of attempting to do here. He's going to defer the payroll tax, and then says that if he's reelected, he's going to try and cut it entirely, although it's not clear that he'd be able to do that. The payroll tax cut is questionable. Even Senate Republicans didn't want to do this as part of the negotiations, because they realize that the issue is not that employers need an incentive to hire people or to invest in their business, right? It's just they can't because there's this pandemic. Perhaps we've heard of it by now. That's the reason why they're in this pickle. It's not because they want to hire workers and they can't do it. It's so the real question, I think, when it comes down to it is, what does this mean for an actual bipartisan piece of legislation happening? Does it make it more likely that both sides in Congress are going to come back to the table? Does it make it less likely? I don't know the answer to that question. I suspect we may get some more details this week, at least in the Senate. Okay, moving on. This is a sort of fascinating story, at least in the media world. But I think that it's interesting for a lot of reasons. But Fox News is what I'm talking about. So despite lawsuits, controversies, advertiser boycotts, Fox News just had the highest rated primetime lineup in June and July in all of television, not just in cable news, all of television in primetime. Fox News won. That's unheard of. More people are tuning into Sean Hannity, Tucker Carlson, and Laura Ingraham. I forget what the other one is. But more people are watching them on a weeknight than they're watching the NBA, than are watching baseball, than are watching NBC, CBS, or ABC. Even the broadcast networks cannot now compete with Fox News in prime time. So if you think about that, more people are watching Sean Hannity than are watching whatever show is on NBC at 9 o'clock. Their ratings are up across the board. It's not just prime time. But I found this a little bit notable. This is according to the New York Times that analyzed the Nielsen ratings. The ratings for Fox fell during two notable recent events: the funerals of George Floyd and John Lewis. Okay, the Wall Street Journal reporting today that Amazon is in talks with the biggest mall owner in the United States to turn department stores into sort of mini Amazon distribution centers. Simon Property Group is reportedly considering leasing vacant spaces that were formerly JCPenney or Sears stores to Amazon, and Amazon would then use them as these fulfillment centers as sort of a way to get products to customers faster, right? There's this theory in retail and in logistics about the last mile, right? The hardest part of the journey of a package is the last mile from the distribution center to the person's house, and often it involves bikes or vans or cars or trucks, and it's not a particularly efficient model right now. So the idea here would be that if you have these sort of mini fulfillment centers in these malls across the country, it would be a way to get some things to people faster. But as for malls, I mean, would essentially, I think, probably be the nail in the coffin for at least the mall as we know it, which is already sort of turning into a relic of another time. I mean, pandemic aside, I can't even remember the last time I went to like an actual physical mall. But in other parts of the country, it's a little bit different. That's where you shop at the mall. But the fact is, the business model of the mall was always that you have these sort of like big anchor tenants, right? Like a JCPenney or a Sears or a Nordstrom or a Lord & Taylor. And those are the things, maybe you're the mall owner, you give those guys a little bit of a deal on the rent, because the idea is those are the stores that get people in the door, and then they spend money in other places at like the pretzel shop in the food court, and maybe they go buy a new pair of sneakers at the, Foot Locker or whatever. But anyway, that's a lot of those stores simply don't exist anymore, and or they're bankrupt and they can't afford these leases. So Amazon could be coming to your local mall. It's sort of an interesting. I mean, I'm fascinated by these stories about the convergence of retail and technology, and Amazon just firing on all cylinders while basically the rest of the retail landscape withers away. It's a strange time. Okay, are you wearing the right mask? Jill would have had fun with this story, I think. But researchers at Duke University just conducted this study. They looked at the 14 most common types of face coverings and masks, and they tried to determine which were the most effective at actually blocking respiratory droplets, right? Which is the whole point of wearing a mask. So unsurprisingly, the N95, the high end sort of like hospital grade N95 mask scored the best. I think that probably everybody would have guessed that. A little bit more surprising for me, at least, was bandanas and gaiters, which are sort of those like elastic neck warmer things that runners often wear. Those scored very poorly. And neck fleeces, and I'm not even exactly sure what a neck fleece is, but neck fleeces scored so poorly that these researchers said they actually may be worse than wearing no mask at all. So I linked to this study in the newsletters. It's sort of interesting depending on what your sort of mask regimen is these days. I'm personally partial to the disposable surgical masks myself. I just find them to be the more comfortable and less invasive of any of them. Though I have been known to use a bandana. Though after reading this, I think I'll probably stop doing that because it just seems like they're not as effective as one would think. So normally we would leave it there, a little bit quick today because obviously it's just me. But before we go, I do want to mention two things are going to drive the news this week that people should be paying attention to. The first is the Biden vice president pick. I think that's almost certainly going to come in the next day or two. It's that will drive the news cycle ahead of the Democratic convention next week, which is going to be virtual. And the other thing is the what I teased to earlier, which is what's happening with college sports. So all five of the biggest conferences, the Pac-10, the SEC, the ACC, the Big 12, and the Big 10, they're all meeting with themselves like the highest levels this week. Trying to figure out what the heck they're going to do about fall sports. And it sounds like the latest reporting from Sports Illustrated says that the Big Ten is basically calling it off already. And what's probably likely going to happen this week, I think, is that you're going to get this domino effect of one conference coming out and saying they're not going to play, and then another conference, and there will be this. Like I said, a domino effect, and then I suspect the president will probably get involved and urge them to figure it out. So anyway, I just wanted to mention those are going to be the two storylines to watch this week. Not a ton else going on. It is we're now in the doggest of dog days of summer. But anyway, we will see you back here tomorrow. That's what you need to know for Monday, August 10th. Thanks, guys.